Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Transrational Perspectives. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Sean Bryant, and we're going to be continuing our interview series where we're speaking with interesting people in the field of peace and conflict studies and discussing different views on the state of the art of the field.
So I'd like to introduce Egidio de Bustamante from Brazil and Spain. He has a BA in International Relations from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio. He has an international MA and PhD in Peace, Conflict, and Development Studies from the UHI, the Universitat Jaume I, James I in Castellón, and he is an alumnus of the Innsbruck MA program in Peace Studies. Now he's a senior lecturer at the University of Innsbruck and is also an external lecturer at some Peace Studies courses at the UHI in Spain. He has been a visiting researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra in Portugal, and a visiting scholar at the University of San Francisco in the USA during the past semester, and also online co-facilitator in 21 and 2022. Egidio is also a member of the Global Circle at the Dialogue for Empathy, Ecology, and Peacebuilding Network, the DEEP network. So, going to you, Egidio, after that introduction, what would you like to add? And what brought you to the field of peace and conflict studies?
Okay, what I would add to that is that sometimes reading my short bio, it seems like we're talking about someone really accomplished that I hardly recognize myself at, because of course when you read those things you don't realize the challenges that go with trying to move on with career and doing research and teaching, right? But I think that answering your question about what brought me to peace studies, I had realized that I actually enrolled in international relations as an undergraduate degree by mistake, because I really entered IR with the expectation of getting to learn different cultures, really, and engage with people. And what I found was a discipline that was mostly concerned with realpolitik. And so, to my dissatisfaction, I just continued with it rather than, say, looking for a bachelor's degree in anthropology, because actually in Brazil there is no BA in anthropology. Anthropology is always on an MA level. We have quite a few good programs in anthropology, right? But still only an MA level. And at the time I was actually applying for anthropology master's degrees and peace studies degrees. And I actually got a scholarship to join the Peace Masters at UHI, and I did part of the Masters here in Innsbruck, where I currently hold the position of senior lecturer, right? But I think that in peace studies, I actually found the opportunity to engage with, say, authority, but really learn from different worldviews, thoughts that felt so enriching to me, really. This is how I ended up in peace studies, in a way, really trying to find quality of peace rather than a common focus on violence that a lot of people that actually take. Because sometimes people claim that peace studies is an offspring from international relations, from international studies that sometimes remains too focused on violence. And actually the tragic history of IR has to do with trying to think of peace but being locked into thinking about war, right? So yeah, has been the thing that I'm interested in. Of course, you cannot evade the idea of addressing, understanding conflict when you are in peace and conflict studies, right? But the quality of engaging with conflict is absolutely different from just, taking a realpolitik orientation.
So you were looking for like cultural studies, anthropology, area studies, and ended up in international relations.
Yeah, yeah. Well, pretty much. I was young, too young, and misinformed to, finishing high school and just decided what to do with life.
Sure.
I don't take away the critical perspectives that I have developed during my undergraduate degree in international relations. But yes, it wasn't quite what I was looking for at the time.
And Gijo, if I remember correctly, because I was one of the people that got to read your doctoral research, that your story of how you came into IR and how you found it in relationship to your expectations seemed to be a catalyst for bringing your research interests to light. And you did your doctoral research on peace and love, which I think is really quite an interesting topic because they're two terms that are so frequently mentioned together in the same breath, either in a nice way or like all these hippies, they just research
Yeah.
peace and love kind of way. And in your text, you take the topic seriously, and you explore really an astounding number of ways of understanding what love could mean from the entire history of Western philosophy and thought, but also from humanistic and transpersonal psychology, peace studies, and international relations, and human rights, if I remember correctly,
And development.
and development. Yes. And it would be interesting to know, having gone through that whole process and spending I don't know how many years, but quite a few years
Yeah.
researching this topic. What did you find, I guess, most interesting or most surprising in through doing that research, and maybe how has it informed the way that you teach or the way that you research or the way that you approach this field?
Yes, well, certainly I think that the first biggest realization had to do with, taking seriously the relationship between an idea of love and its relationship to peace, right? And it's funny because in the end we get this idea of being too much of a hippie. But I mean, Petirin Sorokin, the Russian sociologist that migrated to the US, wrote about 70 years ago, it's about time that we really understand the nature of love and start addressing it. So I just decided to take on that task in a way. And it is challenging first and foremost because really had to do a lot of digging and undoing a lot of problematic Western conceptions of what love actually means to get to a core with which I could actually engage with international studies. And then I define international studies precisely into three streams of thoughts, which would be international development discourse, international human rights discourse, and international relations theory, to really undo a lot of those value-laden assumptions of the world and of people in order to engage from a different level, from peace, from actually a love perspective. And when I say love, of course, it seems a little bit too, shallow and too simplistic, but you really have to dig and go through this Western assumption of what love is to engage with things in a more critical way. Love doesn't take away our critical faculties and engagement with violence and conflict and addressing it in a transformative way, but from relational perspective rather than from a moralistic, let's say, cutting perspective. I'm trying to find the term in English, but really a severing perspective of the relationship. That would be the better approach to it. So yes, I think that I explore a little bit of the idea of love in the West, and I go all the way back to Greek understandings of love. I talk about Christians' assumptions of love. I try to remain within, let's say, my culture area, which was let's say the Western tradition through colonization in Europe, even though it comes from Brazil. And then I also talk about this problematic understanding of love that appears in the Middle Ages, that had to do with idealization of people, that disconnects it from reality, especially between France and Spain. And then through the age of industrialization, romanticism, and capitalism at last, which really fragments any idea of relationship, and love becomes some form of shallow thing that nobody really believes in, and it's associated with sex only. So really get rid of all that and then engage with critical perspectives on love. So I take from humanistic psychology, I take a lot from Carl Rogers, from Erich Fromm as well, which is connected to the critical Frankfurt School. And then who else? And of course, doing my natural leaning towards intercultural dialogue, I engage with a Buddhist perspective on love, especially through Thich Nhat Hanh, which has been very, to be fair, fulfilling to me, and ever since has led to a big engagement with the understanding of love from a Buddhist perspective. And so I would say that it's not the core where to use the word, the heart of my thesis is. It's not the engagement with international studies really, but in a way this archaeology of love, then what that makes it possible to do nowadays. And so I finally get to the point of the question that you answered it. I tried to come up with 3 ideas. Basically, openness, awareness, and presence as 3 fundamental qualities of engagement in conflict with people that don't take away our critical lenses. Because openness, first and foremost, really has to do with, just having done the sort of self-work, the preparedness, that it's only possible to a certain extent, because doesn't matter how much you prepare yourself to engage with people, there's a level of unpredictability in there that, just might render you a little bit lost, right? But this first effort of engagement, of openness is key. The second aspect is awareness. And when I talk about awareness, is awareness of, let's say, if we use the language of team-centered interaction, it really has to do with the awareness of all that is at play into, let's say, restorative, peace circle, and engagement with people. That has to do with self-awareness, awareness of the other, but especially awareness of context, of the globe and what we are trying to address at that situation. Right?
Can you just take a moment as a kind of footnote to explain the theme-centered interaction?
Yeah, well, team-centered interaction was developed by Ruth Cohn, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
As of now, my memory fades about my research, and it has been applied to conflict transformation, especially where I currently teach. In the past, in the research that was carried out in the unit for peace and conflict studies here, and it's just really a simple tool for us to engage with people, like making sure that we are taking care of all aspects of that relationship, the topic that we want to address, the conflict that we are working with. Mm-hmm. So yes, awareness and then presence, because even if you do the personal work of being open enough, even if you are actually aware of all the things that play in a conflict situation, there's something extra that is required of a conflict facilitator or a peace scholar, so to say, engaging with students, fellow researchers, and people dealing with any sort of work environment that actually has to do with the quality of presence, of choosing how you engage with people nonetheless. So presence in a way is a combination of both awareness and of openness that really shifts the quality of the relationship that you're really establishing. And it can be particularly transformative, right? To take a little bit from the research that my thesis supervisor, Dr. Norbert Koppensteiner, does. It's like really, it has an illustrative quality that really, just by showing up and, having done the sort of work of engaging with people, regardless of their positioning within a given conflict or the worldviews, at times, no matter how challenging, difficult, and I'm talking about realities of neo-fascism in Brazil with Bolsonarismo, that quality of engagement that will not let go of that human quality that we always hold, can be transformative in itself because it opens channels of engagement with. I would tell you this: it's not easy, of course, and at times, even though I could reflect about those things, I think I did struggle, engaging from that perspective with people that are extremely conservative and hostile points of view, right? But that takes us back into awareness. If matters of personal security are of importance at a given point, you gotta take some form of precautions of measure. I don't think that necessarily takes away from what I came up with, but it's always the fine tuning and readjusting of this, outcomes of doing a deeper research on this very idea of love.
This is really like the answer to your research question of like what is love, and how can that concept be like integrated or kind of injected into social science research on widely, broadly, and not just maybe in international relations in particular, but of social science. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that basically, let's say that international studies, international relations, development discourse, and human rights were my almost empirical take, but the thesis of engaging with something and really thinking things through because of my background in this area. Really, that's the reason why I approach it. Otherwise, I would say also, length-wise, a thesis is required to have a certain amount of pages, so I might as well just talk about something which I hold some knowledge and expertise in, bring that as, just this empirical take on love and international studies, which actually led me to engage not only with theory alone, but really, if you really look at it from let's say a T-side perspective, a really open, aware, and present perspective, you're not engaging with just texts and ideas. You're engaging with people behind texts and ideas, which also led to a side research that really had to do with engaging with authors and in their very location, oftentimes disembedded, unlocated academic places that are also really not positioned in a critical way of power, privilege, and biographies that actually play out in the social world. Really. So definitely, one should never flatten out those power relationships that exist out there and that really play a role into how we basically engage with people.
So one of the things that I wanted to get into and kind of like open up as a topic of discussion is this big question that you pose, that is, what is love? And then so you've distilled this broad and large cultural concept down to these three characteristics of openness, awareness, and presence.
Mm-hmm.
and and then describe how those qualities can open a different way of engaging in like an intellectual process, or like specifically in kind of what we do in research.
Yeah.
But I want to go back a little bit into like how you got there. So part of the process of getting to there, and um, I liked what you said, that one of the things that was you had to do and it was difficult was like to kind of cut away all of the other notions of cultural notions of what love is.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you explored various different understandings from the Greek to the Brahma Vihara, and then all these many scholars that I think we're all quite familiar with, that have been good friends over the years, like Eric Fromm or Buber and Maslow. Um, so maybe starting with those things, what is it that you found that love is not? What were the big things you learned that you had to kind of let go of or cut away? And then what was it that led you to these ideas of openness, awareness, and presence?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say that certainly what love is not has to do with posing myself the existential question of thinking that at times there are forms of violence that can be, the most humanizing, um, and that really takes us to places that are very difficult. But the realization that love is certainly not a permanent, immutable attitude of understanding, of acceptance, of oftentimes very misconceived with tolerance. And tolerance is very problematic because it really doesn't have to do with acknowledging relationship, really accepting, respecting. So I would say that love is certainly not that assumption of always being that tender person. Um, and look, it's hard even for me, really, yeah, because it's so easy when you slide into just this easy environments of, people are just relaxed and they are not confronted with fundamental challenges that really take them off balance. But sometimes it's important that we acknowledge that happens in the world, and we might as well just have done the sort of work to respond accordingly in the best way possible to the challenge that life poses us, right? So in many ways it has to do with, and this is something that I've been currently doing a lot of research in, and it really has to do with tackling social inequality and discrimination. So the direction that I've been taking with this is really promoting radical equality, and thus really tapping into the unfinished business of decolonizing thought and really diversifying thought, which is something that I assumed that certain disciplines of anthropology could offer me compared to international relations. But there's no guarantee that that was actually taking place in anthropology programs, because you could still approach anthropology with this very colonial mindset of studying the other and basically turning subjects into objects, which is first and foremost a form of violence, right? So it really takes a decolonial approach. It really takes let's say anti-racist vein, and also a pro-gender equality. So I would say that is, let's say, a manifestation of a deep commitment to addressing the very unequal world that we live in and making it a more welcoming place for everyone, really. And if I am to engage with authority, that would be the necessary work that love requires us to do. But then again, I'm talking about authority with small a, right? With difference, with otherness, because especially after really delving into let's say a Buddhist understanding of the Brahmaviharas, Buddhist understanding of love, I no longer claim I can understand the Buberian Martin Buber's thought talking about otherness, but I no longer sustain that. Really, this idea of other with a capital O that is so fundamentally, radically different and dissociated, that we might enter a relationship with, but it's separate still. I would say that I can no longer withhold that. That is just bad faith. I would. So yeah, it's a radical interconnected. There's an aspect of radical interconnectedness to it. That is something that, well, actually Thich Nhat Hanh talks about with the idea of interbeing. And he's not actually the only one that talks about interbeing, but somehow other people are just, not coming to right now. Some other names.
Some of what I hear in this, the direction that you've taken your thinking on this, to me points to one of the fundamental tensions within the field of peace research and practice. Is if we think of peace work from this elicitive conflict transformation point of view, there's one view of what that is a direct in-the-moment engagement relationally between individuals or groups that is contextualized and vernacular only into that moment. Yet at the same time, nobody exists only like that. We also exist within larger systems of social and cultural and political structures, and those can't be ignored as well. So, how then do we, if we're looking at operationalizing love, that seems like what you're saying is also navigating this complicated interconnection between being in relationship with the other in the here and now, but not losing sight of these other elements that actually, I guess, are beyond the human, but not in a nice way, beyond the human in a structural and cultural and political kind of way.
Yeah, not in a cool way.
Yeah, I get what you mean, and I think it's the realization that this list approach of working with people, this at the very present moment, we cannot forget that whoever we are, this very present moment is in many ways shaped by history, by life experiences, that it's not as simple as just asking people to let go of that and just focus right here, right now. Like, imagine I'm having this conversation with you. As of this point, we are, talking about my thesis research, and then all of a sudden I can really forget the history, the episodes of violence that I might have suffered, and how that does not make the very person that I am as of this point, and how I respond to everything. So it is the present, but this idea of how large is the present towards the past, and how large is the present towards the future as well. So it's this enlarged understanding of right here, right now, that really is taking people in their complexity, in their wholeness, and the histories that they bring in order to untangle those difficult, challenging situations, addressing the conflict that we might have at hand, but also the roots that linger from the past, the ghosts that kind of haunt us in many ways. So yeah, there's a tension in there with this elusive approach and what I uphold, but I think we can definitely reconcile that, because we just cannot forget history, past traumas, challenges, these affections at times when they really, really mark us, and structures of inequality, really. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, yes, of course. these kind of ideas really touch into, at least for me, it becomes a very almost like mystical tension, because this is, this interbeing idea, or I think it's also called interdependent co-origination. It always means two things at the same time. Like, you are all of these things and you're also none of these things. You are your whole biography and you're not your biography. You are in the present moment and you're not in the present moment. And it's navigating this like paradoxical tension, which then if we then take this, Lederackian moral imagination view, like he says that it's in the paradoxical tension where the energy for transformation is. Which then brings me back to your three concepts, because if I was thinking about, well, how do you operationalize paradoxical tension of in the present moment? I mean, openness, awareness, and presence sounds like a pretty good start to me. I can't really imagine another way of doing it. And I imagine you found the similar curiosity in researching love, in that it's a thing that everyone says and you kind of think you know what you mean until you have to write it down. And one of the best pieces of advice someone ever gave me in doing applied conflict work is that the quality of presence you bring into the room is the greatest tool that you have. And everyone knows this on a small level.
And that's Egido's thesis,
Yeah.
right? That's love.
Yeah. Is that when you walk into a meeting and someone's super tense and angry already, that automatically has an effect. So even at the most mundane level, that quality of presence is changing it.
Let me just say that I also fail. Yeah.
Oh yes, of course. Oh, so you're also human.
Yeah. But yes, it's funny that you mentioned this, because I got you to a point in which withholding this contradiction is not an issue to me. This contradiction exists, and it really it will be given at the very moment the direction of how you answer a given situation, right? Are we really trying to talk about more structural realities? What is more imperative at that very moment, right? Are we trying to address structural inequality that have been affecting someone's life up to a certain crisis point, or are we trying to do some emergency work of addressing things in the very moment, saving some breath and energy so that we carry on with a much more challenging let's say struggle of transforming social reality, transforming others. I was just thinking about William Broad and Rosemary Anderson's Transforming Self and Others. But in this case, I wouldn't say that it necessarily would involve self, but really working with people in need and transforming to the extent possible their most immediate conflictive realities, not losing sight that are much larger. If we put up structural inequalities as conflict, need addressing. Yeah.
And have you found that these kinds of considerations and frames and, I guess, practices, have they also influenced the way that you approach teaching? Since we're all also peace educators by some understanding, how do you think it's shaped the way that you engage with thinking about teaching?
Oh, yeah, I would say very, very much, because I really don't shy away from actually engaging with very critical texts on the coloniality, on basically diversity, equality, and inclusion, anti-sexism, and really, addressing tensions that oftentimes appear in the room, and at the same time, really, holding the space for students to voice out their concerns, expose their challenges, their conflicts, their conservative views, oftentimes, in order to be able to address them from retaining this fundamentally relational perspective, not severing, not undoing these ties, and letting go of our common humanness. And what are we doing together? Exploring this very assumption that, well, we came together for possibly different reasons, but nonetheless, we are here. So we might as well just try to work together to make peace So I don't know if I answered you, but
yes, of course.
Yeah, and then really engage different thoughts. I mean, retain that attitude of being a facilitator, but also forever a curious student of learning with, seeing students not as students but as classmates. And of course, saying that doesn't take away that I occupy the role of a facilitator, meaning that I have certain roles to fulfill that might be different than just entering a space as a mere student.
Of course.
And that comes really thinking through the very idea of grading, which we have to attend to a certain extent because we still are embedded in a university framework, right? But really challenging the assumption that we can assess someone, right? And their ideas without really being in that person's shoes, what they have submitted, what they were able to reflect on when they actually write an essay. But I can, as a fellow classmate, just engage with those ideas and just enter conversation with them. So I would say that is how that comes into classroom.
Thank you.
Fellow students.
So we've talked a bit about what has shaped your perspectives on peace and conflict studies, and also what has led to what informed your research, but also what you learned from it, and how that's kind of shown up in your practice and your teaching. It would also be interesting to know from your view, what would you say is the state of the art of the field of peace and conflict studies, or what do you think are some of the most important issues, and maybe also what do you think is maybe an underserved or under-researched area that deserves more attention in the field of peace research?
Well, I would say that if we really call peace research, peace studies, that area that appeared in Europe, let's say in the second half of the 20th century, carried out by scholars that oftentimes were critical of IR, war, and anti-war and violence. Oftentimes those perspectives were biased and unpositioned, to use the term, right? They don't really situate critically their knowledge. So that's what we have been engaging in, really bring, let's say, social studies thought into peace studies, and really basically transforming this field area anew. Because if you really are talking about anti-racism, then you're gonna have to look for entirely different canon of knowledge and of work, and rethinking from its very own inceptions of what actually peace studies and its relationship to let's say international studies is, right? Likewise, I think that it's already put out there how feminist research agendas have really transformed entire well-established disciplines. So it's only fair that in peace studies we already take a lot of that into. I was talking about positionality, which is really something that we take from feminist research, but really realizing that there has never been a neutral scientific point, but rather it was actually a hidden male gaze onto the world, with the weight of being a white Western male that is like oftentimes unchallenged, right? And doesn't come from that existential experience of discrimination, of closed doors. So, I mean, this is what definitely something that it's important to bring into peace studies. Not to say that the research that has been done is out of merits, because it certainly has a lot of value and it informs what I think about, but to really stay true to this idea of peace as the seedbed of culture and diversity, like Ivan Illich would say, we have to open space and allow people from all different, let's say, perspectives to really occupy this peace space and allow people to just find their own strengths in a way. I think that realizing that life conditions and inequality has become so extreme in the past few decades, and especially past the pandemic crisis of coronavirus. I think that's something, inequality is something that deserves attention. So I briefly touched that, I would say, in my work, especially when I criticize this idea of development, but it has never been more critical, really, because I mean, living here in Innsbruck and realizing the very precarious conditions in which people live, and coming from a very unequal country myself, which is Brazil, that really needs immediate attention. I think it would be too simplistic to just put social inequality in terms of conflict only, but that certainly needs immediate addressing, or climate change. As I'm actually, I always really approach this idea of development in very critical lenses, and always kind of connected to an idea of ecology, right, and ecological regeneration, which then takes me towards ecofeminism, towards deep ecology, and towards when we view indigenous perspectives in Latin America as very powerful critiques to the idea of development that need to be celebrated and perceived as a fundamentally peace perspective. So those are some of the let's say ramifications from my research and from what peace studies looks like and what peace studies can actually become. But really, I take to heart this idea that peace studies is a field area that is not a closed discipline the way that, let's say, international relations is. There's a lot more room for us to explore different perspectives.
So just to sum up some of the things you said, the first one was like a methodological consideration of self-location, and the next was like a broad topic of like social inequality as a topic of research, climate change, and as a peace issue, and then finally, you said buen vivir, or maybe call it like a holistic ecology perspective.
Yeah.
That are some of the things that need to be, or that you think are underserved. And I want to circle back to the first thing you said about self-location, because I think that there's a lot that it could be useful there, and maybe providing a little bit of context, because I don't know who's watching here, is that all three of us have taught a course in which we accompany master's students to find a thesis topic and start them in trying to identify their self-location and make it explicit, and use that as a catalyst for identifying a research problem and research question. And like, one of the things that we would encountered in doing that is that like sometimes it's very difficult for students to grasp that and to do it, and one of the reasons why is because they're asking them to speak from like their own voice, right? And rather than a very well rehearsed and practiced third person perspective. And even like technical writing, scientific writing, academic writing is often taught in that way, to use the grammatical construct of a passive voice. The research was conducted, not I did the research, or there's no active subject that's doing the research, and that's done on purpose, right? And so we often would joke about it. It was like, well, we spend the first half of the semester trying to get the students to speak from their voice, use the I perspective, and we spend the rest of the year trying to get them to stop. Yeah, so I think just wanted to add that this is something that we've been actively engaging in our pedagogy, but also experiencing the challenges of what goes along with that, because I think that one of the misunderstandings that we deal with students over the years is that thinking that self-location means something like anything goes, or that my personal opinion on something has kind of greater validity than it is. I don't know if either of you can speak to that, to maybe kind of flesh out this important point that.
I would say that that really comes from situating oneself in a larger social reality and claiming the space one occupies. So it's always aware of the politics around how one appears as a researcher, as a subject, and speaks from that located position, right? Acknowledging at times issues of identity, of background, of this discrimination. But oftentimes, of course, when we ask them to talk about themselves, a certain kind of imbalance might manifest in the sense of let's say, a free path to just center everything around oneself, and not being able to realize that we might fall at times into egocentrism and self-centeredness that also need a little bit of steering back into. Let's remind ourselves from let's bring back the very idea of openness, awareness, and presence. It really asks us to do that sort of positioning self-work, but without losing sight of otherness, of our environments, of our surrounding, of the social and political dimension of navigating a very complex world. So, but yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we might run into these imbalances, and finding gentle ways to just say, "You're taking it too far." Let's just bring down a notch, and possibly not talking about your very self permanently, but engage with other people in the room and listen to the other parties. Let's say, given conflicted situation. So it's that idea of dynamic balance in the sense that you talk about something, you address something, and you are aware that in the process of addressing, of exercising a certain tension towards one direction, it might continue, and it might require you to time to bring it back. So navigating this world in which you affirm something, you take it back, you just try to I don't know, to just balance things.
And I think what you also alluded to as well is that there's a component to this topic that the reason for many people why it's difficult to write in this I perspective is because if they're already doing a master's, they must have a bachelor's degree, because we exist in some kind of formal structure. So that has been taught as a thing you shouldn't be doing, as a non-legitimate thing to speak from the I. And then I think
Yeah.
that's in
Except
a way.
if you were in like feminist studies.
Sure,
or something
sure.
like that.
Yeah. Well, and then I think this is often one of the difficulties in peace studies is something that started as a critical discipline, once it becomes something you can actually study and get a degree in, then it sits within the parameters of having, credit hours and grading and having to write the structure of a dissertation. And I think that, it is still a relatively new field. We're just approaching the time now where someone could potentially have done an undergraduate, a master, and a PhD all in peace studies. That's relatively new. So it's, in a way, still trying to figure out itself, like how do you be a critical discipline within the framework of a old university setup that still has these particular constraints of having to, at one level, wanting to try to be horizontal, but also, like when you are a lecturer or a facilitator, you have other responsibilities and expectations. And I think that, in a way, that the experience of teaching peace studies is the microcosm of peace studies itself, in trying to balance all of these tensions that you were talking about the relationship between what's going on relationally in the room and all the embedded structures that go beyond that and shape and influence them.
Mm-hmm.
I would say to
The
that.
globe in the theme-centered interaction.
I would respond to that by reminding us of this book by Adam Curl, who, by the way, was the person that founded the first peace studies program in Europe, in Bradford, in the UK. He wrote this famous book, The Fragile Voice of Love, in which he starts addressing international studies war and violence with this idea of love and opposing it to this idea of black cloud. But he also has another book that is called Mystics and Militants, which basically frames the sort of work that as peace students, scholars, activists have to carry out at the same time that we are militants and we're working as activists into the creation of a new world. We don't lose sight of this embeddedness into a larger whole that don't really have necessarily to talk about spirituality, but how your very everyday mundane peace praxis is infused by spirituality in a way. So we always remain as mystics. And I just don't want to forget mentioning that one big challenge of people that might end up doing an undergrad degree, a BA degree in peace studies, a master's, and then a PhD. One important element, just not to lose track of structural realities, is employability, right? Because at times we're with this understanding that I have done so to say a career in peace studies, and I can be employed in so many different ways, and I can use my workforce to promote change in the world. But it's really difficult for people to really understand what we are doing. And so I don't want to talk about selling oneself. That's really horrible, but promoting the sort of work that we can carry out in very critical ways, it's of big importance.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe we can do another session sometime on like the interface of the higher education with employability.
Yeah,
we have a lot to say about that. Right?
The precarity of it all, and actually the mental health problems that goes along with that, the sort of extreme productivity that it's a big challenge. Yeah.
A bit of a good segue here that you recently have a new position at the University of Innsbruck. Congratulations with that. As that, I guess you're right in the beginning phase of starting a new chapter of your academic career. So, what are some of the things that you are looking forward to in sense of new directions of research or of teaching?
I think that the beauty of my current contract is that it allows me to have time to do research on my own. As a senior lecturer, my contract is unrelated to research, but I just do research on my own, and it's just nice not to be bound by, let's say, a schedule and expectation of producing something thus far, and just selecting books and taking my time with them, cherishing, really going deep and learning. So I would say that is one of the positive aspects and something that I look forward to, because in the past I have done a lot of reading that and research that oftentimes felt rushed, or to attend to needs of publishing, or putting my thesis out there. And I think if you really take it as a work of art that requires discipline, but it requires its own timing and patience and care, that in certain frameworks you're not really given. So yeah, so that's something that I cherish, and also just putting my ideas out there, sharing them with students, and checking, seeing if there's resonance in there, asking for feedback. Really understanding the classroom as this space, again, a space of peers, of students at different stages of their own research and life, but really in a circle way, sharing, listening to each other. That is the quality of the classroom and of my work that I really, really cherish, and that I will really hold no matter where I go.
So, Egidio, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you making the time to talk with us and sharing your work on such a personal level, revisiting this project that was your doctoral dissertation, and really taking the time to dig into some of the insights that you got from it.
Well, thank you, Chu, so much for the opportunity, for taking the time to go through my thesis work that as of this point feels very far away in time. I actually went through it very quickly just to remind myself of a couple ideas of things that I have done, really. But I really appreciate you reaching out and wanting to do this interview. We have been talking for a while now, but then holidays came in and we had to schedule. But at last we are here. We have just done this, and it's just also really nice to be in touch with you and to just explore what we can create together.
Thank you so much, Egidio, and all the best for your new chapter in your career. And going to be looking forward to continuing to accompany you along this peace studies path. The world is very small, and we will, I'm sure, keep crossing paths and running into each other.
Likewise, yeah. Likewise. Really, excited to get to hear about your future projects.
Thank you.